So, hi, Bill. This is our first recorded podcast episode, and I'm very excited to speak with you in this format because I know we've been speaking for a number of years actually now, just almost having fun, just speaking with each other and recording our conversations and putting them out on TikTok. So, this is our first conversation that we're actually going to put out into a podcast, which is very, very exciting. So, I guess before we dive in, for those that don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself and before we dive into our topic for today.
Okay. Uh, I am a media researcher by trade, and my secret identity is as a philosopher and a writer. And I work on a lot of different things at the same time, not exactly multitasking, but rather cramming one task in after the other and using single pointed attention on one thing at a time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So a multitasker, well, not quite. You've got lots of irons in different fires. And I know that we're particularly kind of connected over more our kind of view of the world, and like, I guess, a more spiritual kind of view, if you like. And yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about your kind of beliefs and what drew us together?
It's what is reality is the underlying question. And although there are no scientific answers yet, as we live our lives, we have to live it according to some guess as to what reality is. Even if we're not aware of it, we're making an implicit guess by our actions. It either reflects, the prevailing worldview currently is that the universe is an accident, and it's predominantly matter and energy. And matter matters a lot to people who have that worldview, because if it's all accidental, first of all, it's kind of depressing. And in order to, whether we admit it or not, whether this is subconscious or conscious, if we do have that accidental worldview where there's really no purpose or meaning, then we're looking for distractions, diversions, things to entertain us, keep our minds off the fact that we're in a black hole of purposelessness, meaninglessness. It's not a healthy worldview, in other words. And the fact that we compete with each other and put each other down and have violence and wars, and we make ourselves sick and we lower our immune system, all of the negativity stems from that lack of an expectation that the universe has meaning to it, that we're part of something glorious. So religions have corrected that to some extent for the people who subscribe to each religion. The religion says it's meaningful. There's a God. God created us. And therefore, the world is a divine place. And we are in some way connected to divinity, maybe as, students, acolytes, trying to get more spiritual ourselves. All religions help foment that attitude, which is definitely a step up from the accidental point of view. Now, I started life with, my religion was science. To me, that was like the greatest possible thing, and that would explain to me what reality is. But as I studied it, and I noticed that there was no explanation actually of what reality is, other than Big Bang, objects colliding with each other. Somehow by random collisions, life began, and then more random accidental things happened, and then consciousness began. So that seemed to me to be an incomplete description. Like, it didn't account for my flow state experiences. it certainly didn't account for my experiences of telepathy. It didn't account for my lucky hunches that I've had all my life, where I can see things coming. People call me a visionary sometimes in media research. And the visionary part is, to me, it's part of the fact that my consciousness is connected with all other consciousness.
Mm.
So my view of reality is that we're one big consciousness. And when you look at the whole thing, it is so incredibly magnificent. It earns the word God. And that's scientific. How could you say consciousness isn't scientific?
Mm.
The one thing we know for sure is that we experience consciousness.
Mm.
We experience everything else through consciousness, through our consciousness. How could we deny that consciousness on a much greater scale might not exist?
Mm-hmm.
That wouldn't be a scientific approach.
Mm-hmm.
If we know consciousness can exist, then why not a big consciousness?
Mm-hmm.
So I see no barrier to postulating that as a scientific theory, which of course I have done in one of my books, or two of them or more. And so that's my spirituality. And it comes down to being inspired by life, because we're part of, I can't prove it, although all of my experience, which, it's experience is subjective. So when I have altered states of consciousness, synchronicity occurs, things that are so improbable. Like, I notice a guy I'm talking to, we're talking, and for some reason, every time I make this gesture of raising my right hand, he flinches and he seems to cringe. And then I said to him, I asked him, did you have somebody in your life when you were a kid who was bigger than you, who maybe was a relative? I'm picturing maybe she was a woman and she was hit you with a cane or something. And he said, yeah, it was my aunt. And she did have a cane, and she did raise it like she was going to hit me with it. And, I was really little, but I was scared she was going to hit me. She never did hit me, but I was scared. I didn't realize, he said, that I've had this flinch reaction until you just mentioned it. I guess I must have been doing this all my life. That is so improbable in the accidental materialist view of the world. That wouldn't happen. It would never happen. So I have these experiences almost daily. I'm convinced of my theory. I can't prove it to anybody, but that I still have to try to explain it and see if they would give it possibility. Let it be possible in their minds. That's already going to be less negative than just ruling it out. And the spirituality you and I share, however differently we may describe it, relates to guidance from the universe. We both experience events constantly happening to us that are guiding us in one direction or another. And we pick up on it. And it's something you and I have in common. And as soon as we discovered that, we started to have these podcasts, video casts, whatever casts we're going to continue to do and expand and try to share this view of reality. Even if it's wrong, it can make lives less burdensome than they are for so many people. Just admitting that it's possible can lighten people up. Can't do any harm.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. And I think personally, from my perspective, since kind of discovering, I think you said, what is reality? And that is the question really that we tend to try and explore in every kind of conversation that we have. So maybe that's the name. Maybe that's the podcast name. What is reality?
Yes.
But with that, I think for me, and I think I've said this to you before, it it's such an insignificant moment, but I remember it really, really well. And it was one Christmas when like work kind of shut down. Like everybody has these like 2-week shutdowns over Christmas. And I was thinking, you know, we had Christmas with your family and all this kind of stuff. And then there's these weird days in between that, you know, nobody really knows what to do. And I just remember thinking, how many times can somebody go shopping, go to the cinema, or go to the pub, right? And it started that for me, it's such an insignificant moment, but that was for me the catalyst to start thinking, what is the purpose? There must be more than this. Like there must be more. And then, you know, for me, going to America was like a huge catalyst to kind of see a different perspective on the world and realize the space that you occupy is actually very, very small, and to be able to see alternative perspectives is really valuable and, you know, can only broaden your horizons. So I think as you're talking there about like what is reality and discovering this, you know, whether we're right or whether we're wrong, I know personally, since I guess finding this deeper sense of meaning and purpose in the world, I know I've been joyous. Like I'm, you know, people say to me, you've been like so happy, Natalie, for years, right? And it's not because like bad things don't necessarily happen. It's just I have this, I guess you could call it faith, right? It's like this deep faith that everything is unfolding as it's meant to. And like you say, if we are wrong, well, great, because I'm kind of, you know, in this bliss state that is quite difficult. I'm not saying I'm superhuman, but it's quite difficult for me to see the world as anything other than magical now. So I think if more people could see it like that, whether we're delusioned or not, it's a pretty nice place to be, right?
I think it's if it was only two choices between that and the mess that the world is in, you know, it's clear, you know, scientists would call it game theory. You know, the game theory points at betting on this view of reality because the odds are that it's got just as good a chance of being right, if not a greater chance of being right, than the other diminishing, dwarfing view of reality. And it puts us in a more powerful state to live our lives more impregnable by events, above the weather, able to deal with whatever comes up because we trust that the universe is benevolent and has a good reason to be benevolent to us because we are it.
No, exactly. And like, and when I was thinking about, you know, what we could talk about today, it's very strongly linked into this conversation because it was a thought around everything happens for you, not to you. And you were talking there about there's things that you just can almost see in the future. It's like you're a visionary, or like things that you can see are happening and you can't necessarily explain it, but you just know. It's like an inner knowing. And I think humanity as a whole, I mean, I'm guilty of this too. Like sometimes we try and fight the reality and almost want it to be a different way. But if we took this kind of mindset that everything happens for you and not to you, how do you think that would change people's perception, if you like?
Well, this is part of the reason why I believe that my view of reality is the right view of reality, is because if we do go with the flow of events, assuming that the universe has integrity and there's a purpose for everything, so all of a sudden we lose a job or whatever happens. Let's say we lose our job. Most people would react to that by being devastated and certainly fearful and angry and resentful and all kinds of stuff that doesn't help. Or they could say, this must mean that the universe is clearing the way for me to do that other thing I've been wanting to do for years, but I haven't had the guts to go out and do it. And now I have to do it. That's terrific.
Mm. Yeah, it's clearing the space. It's clearing the space for something. You know, I always say nothing happens by coincidence, and I believe our bodies are telling us when it's time to move on from a situation, whether it's like a relationship, a job, a a friendship even. I believe our bodies are telling us constantly, and I think sometimes we just cling on so tightly because we don't want it to be true. And I believe that's when, the longer you hold on, I believe that the universe will strip it away from you in probably the least happy kind of joyous way. So, when you, maybe it is a job and you know that you need to leave it like deep down, but you're holding on because of fear or you're scared. I believe that's when the universe will say, no, you're going to lose your job. We're going to force you. You're going to be pushed. If you can, I always see it as like, you could walk nicely through the door or we're going to shove you. And, I think over time I've realized it's much nicer just to walk through the door rather than be pushed through it.
Well, that kind of gets us down into the details of, why is the universe living through us? What role does that play in the whole thing? So my theory is that let's call the one self God. I also use that term interchangeably with the universe.
Mm-hmm.
So all that exists, the one consciousness, God, has nobody to play with unless he creates alter egos of himself, herself. And so now God has company. And in doing this creation, spinning off of aspects of oneself and giving them independent existence and the right to make their own decisions, free will.
Mm-hmm.
Free will to the one who knows everything involves no risk, no possibility of error. Mm-hmm. However, giving free will to creatures who have only a portion of that wisdom, that omniscience, only a portion of it, free will means there will be mistakes made. Mm-hmm. And then learning from those mistakes. Mm-hmm. So although God may be able to look out through your eyes and my eyes and the eyes of everybody else in the universe simultaneously without any confusion, because God has infinite attention span, computing power, you're looking at it as a biocomputer. All that exists is one big biocomputer. And it's like in a video game, it's creating avatars of itself and living through each of these many avatars simultaneously. And they themselves are on a journey of learning, growing, and they may have to change bodies along the way because it can be a long process because there's so much to learn. It's such a complicated universe. And when you're born, at least on this planet, there's no manual telling you any of these things. So you don't know what the heck is going on. You just kind of tossed into it. And in our case, we were born into a culture that gave up on the idea that there's purpose and that there's a direction, that it was all accidental, a random movement. And so we landed here and we're influenced by that culture. Less so now, much less so now, but years ago, very much more controlled by that underlying idea, which kind of pollutes and negates so much of what's good about life. So there we are, going through this process of learning and growing, so that in the end, we can be reabsorbed into the one and we'll understand what's going on. And the one will welcome us back as like another personality aspect. So the one is improving itself over time by these experiences of these journeying people that are really him, her. And then the universe is trying to help us all along. It's not just our own energies. We've got, I used to call it, I still call it Noia, the opposite of paranoia, meaning the suspicion that someone's out to help me. And so they are. And it may not just be God directly, it may also be intermediaries. And whoever is helping us, thank you. It, you know, I love it. It's great to have help like this. And now when I have a bad moment, it takes a few seconds for somebody to remind me of what's really going on, and I snap out of it. So I definitely appreciate the help. And it's so obvious. It's so unlikely that song on the radio is going to come up with exactly what I need to hear at that time in the lyrics, just at that moment where it syncs up perfectly with what's going on in my mind. Yeah, that's an accident, right? I don't believe, you know, the odds of those kinds of things going on constantly. And the more you get into the space that you and I are in, the more we are aware of it. And we see the help coming, and we see that isn't a threat. That's a great suggestion.
Yeah, it's very timely that we're having this conversation today, actually, because I met an ex-colleague this week, and, you know, it's been years. It's, you know, it's been probably 10, 11 years, something like that. And, you know, obviously in starting TTM, you know, I've reconnected with a lot of people that, you know, used to be, you know, part of certain chapters of my life. And it's amazing to me because I had this reflection just this week. When I think about the journey in like starting TTM, I have needed every single experience, every single job, every single, you know, person, and every single experience. It's almost, I laugh because I'm like, oh my God. And it just so happens that I was in that job and I knew that person, and now they're coming back round to help me now. And I actually started to write a little bit about this, and it's about kind of going with the flow of like life's river. And the thing is, it may not always make sense like today, like tomorrow, or even next year, but at some point in time, that experience was necessary. And I think for me this week, it was a huge reminder. I'm like, would I ever have thought 12 years ago that I needed to meet this person so that they could come back into my life to help me now with TTM? You know, it's as you say, when you start to see the magic, you can't unsee it. And it's, you know, people call me a bit crazy or whatever, but it's you can't unsee it, and it can't be a coincidence. There's too many of those moments. I mean, the probability, I read a book once and it was talking about what is the probability, if you think about like gambling, like on a table, like to throw, like say you've got 5 dice, for them all to land on 6, like every single time. Like sure, it could happen, like we could create the universe. Yeah, I mean, eventually, if you had enough goes at throwing the dice, it might line up, but would it line up again and again and again? Like the probability and the amount of times you'd need to throw those dice in order for that to line up. I mean, come on, you know, we'd be here for a long time. So it's, yeah, it doesn't always make sense in the moment, but at some point it will.
Exactly. Everything that has hurt us, eventually we'll be grateful for.
We don't realize it at the time. Our ego at the time might want to just skip a step and think, oh God, I just want to get through this bit. But it's all part of the experience. And I think there's because obviously at times, I'm human as well. And sometimes I'm like, oh God, I wish this wasn't happening right now. And but the thing is, I always return to that thought, and I'm able to center myself back to the thought that, like, Natalie, like, this is the way it's unfolding for a reason. And with that, it gives me a sense of peace. And I just think if more people were able to tap into that thought or that belief that, it's happening for you, not to you, then I think the world would be a much more peaceful place.
No question about it in my mind. I think they just have to open their minds to it as a possibility, and look for the clues, be more attentive, and take their time. I mean, we're rushing. We're always rushing, and rushing is really a sign of the ego. And maybe it's worth talking a little bit about what I think the ego is.
Yeah, please.
I think that in the beginning, when God started spinning off avatars, that he had to make an adjustment that would allow that to happen. And that adjustment is the original source of ego. It's that willingness to be an individual, to not be part of a larger thing, to be separate, to be oneself. And then that gets carried too far under certain conditions. So we all have that in us, and we need that in order to have been spun off. It's probably lines of code, but whatever. Say that it's lines of code. So that we all have these lines of code which allow us to exist as apparently separate beings. Nothing wrong with that. Has to be, no problem. But then picture one of us here on this planet being born into this culture which basically believes it's all an accident and there's no meaning, no purpose, no mission, nothing to inspire getting up in the morning. I mean, how many pubs can you go to, as you said? It all becomes kind of stupid. But we aren't aware of that as we're being inculcated into it. We're being assimilated, acculturated. We're learning how to copy everyone else, like our parents, and do what they do, and fit in and be protected by the herd and not stand away from that. And we experience making lots of mistakes. And this makes us unhappy and defensive. And so the ego starts to get kind of infected. It starts to accept a defensive stance very early. Maybe 1 year old or earlier. We start, children just born tend to be kind of angelic and happy. Excuse me, free-spirited, like us. But quickly get wounded by events and imperfections and not being perfect and not being competent and not knowing enough and starting to worry and be concerned about outcomes and where this is all going. Feelings getting hurt, not knowing what to do about it. And the ego continues to find coping mechanisms, always from a defensive posture. And take just a whole movement into a defensive posture sets us up for all kinds of mistakes. I mean, we're constantly judging, am I in trouble here? What do I have to do to fight back? How do I get through this next conversation without screwing up? It's all starting from a defensive point of view. So we have ego in a defensive mode. And then we have the acceleration of the culture ever since written language, I believe we've been getting information overload. But where it is today is so far beyond where it was 400 years ago with the internet being bombarded for hours. We spend 11 hours a day with one media experience or another. 11 hours. We're only awake for, 16 hours or whatever it is. So 11 out of 16 hours, we're being bombarded by media, which are throwing stuff at us as fast as possible so we don't switch to some other media. They keep us sucked in by, rapid fire. Maybe we've bored them already. Move on to something else. Quick. Do something else. Some visual, sound, some new idea. Switch to this, switch to that. Anyway, the combination of ego and the accelerators of the culture creates, like pandemic ADHD or the equivalent. So we can't think straight. We don't have any time to meditate, contemplate, concentrate. We're drawn from one thing to another. And it's all like distraction from discovering what our gifts are. We're here with certain gifts that we it's stuff we love to do, and we're here to do it to give other people joy and be appreciated for having done that. And we're wasting time if we do anything else, but we do waste time doing almost everything else except bringing out our gifts and sharing them with the world. And the ego is actually causing all of that through its fear and anger and avoidance of actually simply absorbing what's going on in a more stoic and contemplative way, where we can see that half of the problems are really obvious opportunities, and the other half of the problems are just more subtle opportunities. But all of the problems are opportunities, actually. Opportunities for learning and opportunities for finding out where our true life is going to come from when we finally wake up and can be in flow state because we're doing what we love and energizing and activating the gifts that we were born with.
Yeah, I think it's a powerful reframe, isn't it, between these are issues or problems, or actually these are opportunities for us to work through, if you like. You talked of there's a couple of reasons that we're less connected now, and some of it is to do with the bombardment of like overstimulation and with different media outlets, social media. We're all on our laptops or phones constantly. I maybe have a cynical view, but I'm keen for your thoughts. Do you believe that there might be a reason that people would almost want to distract us from the power that we have inside by bombarding us with all this stuff? Is there, do you believe that there's a reason that people might want to, might not want us to know what power lies within?
I've created a whole series of novels based on that idea. When you're writing fiction, it's all writers know this. That sorry, we're gonna have to do some editing. George, please cut out that throat clearing stuff. Where was I?
So we're talking about the power that we all have inside of us.
And
constant distraction.
Is somebody doing it on purpose?
Yeah.
Well, in my series of novels, it's a character called Purse. And he is behind all of this. Wherever these negative media effects are arising, he's the one who's doing it, and he's doing it on purpose. And he's also stirring up all the wars to make us into vicious fighters so that he can use us to storm the gates of heaven and take over the multiverse. So that could be happening. There could be a character like that in the panoply. It could be that God did create a avatar, and the avatar was kind of a risky one. God was experimenting. Let's see if let's inhabit a character that's kind of the opposite of me. Let's see. That would be fun, and it will create something will happen out of that, and it will be surprising because I'll give this devil, the fallen angel, I'll give this character a good deal of power and intelligence and free will, of course, and he will definitely surprise me, and that will be fun. That will be quite a game. And I can't lose anyway, so I'm always going to be more powerful, but it'll keep me on my toes and see what happens. So that's part of the underlying premise of Agents of Cosmic Intelligence. And I was about to say that serious writers understand that it's very difficult to write utopian fiction or to create a utopian movie, because fiction and movies, there has to be an antagonist, a problem facing the protagonist. You got to have that, or there's no fun. It's blah. If everything's just too good and it's all good, then where's the story? There's got to be some threat, and then the threat is conquered or not. But most cases, in the ideal story, the protagonist wins in the end by growing, becoming more self-aware and a better person, and solves the problem. So God may have built that dramatic principle into the universe, and there may be characters roaming around at higher levels of power than we have, mucking things up, but we might also be protected by agents, I choose to call them, again, higher beings than us with more powers and abilities and ability to not have to wear a material body. Just be energy creatures, can be visible, invisible, take any form, read minds, help people. So we could have agents and rebels, saints and demons, angels and devils, whatever. There could be that. And in fact, Zoroaster made it his philosophy that there was a good God and a bad God. And what we experience in life is the interplay of the good God and the bad God. I think that gives the bad God too much power in the scenario. I don't see why. I mean, anything's possible. But I trust God. You used the word faith before. It's the same thing. Faith is trusting God. And Einstein would put it differently. He'd say, I trust nature. And I used to, when I was trying to reach people, I didn't want atheists to not read my book by using the word God. So when I wrote Mind Magic, I always referred to God as the universe. But now I speak openly of God. And it's interesting because many of the things that I'm now writing in my blogs and circulating to people in the media industry, for years I held back because I thought, hey, they're going to think I'm a whack job. And I won't be able to do much good then. So I was very cautious. But I took a step at a time, and now I'm all in. I don't hold anything back. And I'm enjoying this quite a bit.
Yeah, I think Yeah, so there's so much there, but in terms of, the good and bad characters, if you like, it's like any story or any movie. It's, if there's not something to overcome, if there's not a bad guy, it's a bit of a boring plot, isn't it, really? And I think each of us individually have our own almost like hero journeys. If you think about everything you've had to get through in order to be sat right there talking to me today, like, you've come through your own hero journey, so have I. And I think we all individually have those stories, and I think everybody's story is powerful, and we all have one, right? But I think collectively, when you think of it in a bigger, more zoomed out kind of perspective, it's each of our own journeys or stories help write the bigger novel or the bigger movie. Like, so each of us individually are writing our own, our own page, if you like, but together we're kind of creating this monumental kind of ever created, right? So I think I have that kind of perspective as well, in terms of, life would be pretty boring if there was nothing to overcome. And the faith I have is that, like any good movie, the good guy always wins. So it's that kind of, no matter how dark the world is, and it's not that I'm not aware of that, I am, but I believe, like, having this deep faith and like doing this work that we do, I believe that that the good guy will win. So yeah, I think we're all writing our own pages, if you like, and it's pulling it together to make one big massive storybook.
The world's greatest adventure. We are living the world's greatest adventure.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
and we are the one consciousness that's always existed. We should be very happy.
Mm-hmm.
We should all be very happy. It kind of puts everything else in perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, the painter made a mistake. Who cares? Fine, and fixed it. No big deal. Why worry?
Yeah. No, exactly. You said as well, in the past, you maybe held back on like sharing the fact that you have these beliefs and, the way that you view the world. And I know I kind of share that, in terms of, people think you're nuts and think you're a bit crazy. What I'm interested to understand, what has ignited you to kind of, or driven you to be a bit more out in the open, to be a bit more truthful in terms of who you are and what you believe? What's driven you to do that?
I think it was encouragement from readers of my blogs when media research, business people, very serious, hardworking, on successful tracks in their careers, reading me writing about media, and I began to sneak in my other ideas. They started to give me feedback like, Bill, I really enjoyed both your blogs, your media blog, of course, but I also am enjoying your, and then they would either call it my consciousness blog or my spirituality blog. And as soon as I heard them say spirituality, it kind of gave me permission.
Mm.
They were saying they like it and they acknowledge that it's spiritual. Okay, then here I am.
Out you come, I think, I mean, for me, it's great to hear, because I'm not gonna lie and say that I haven't had those same thoughts. It's almost like, if you are really open with this stuff, there is a fear that you won't be taken seriously, and I guess what I've learned is that the two can coexist. Just because I'm really kind of spiritual, or really up there in the ether, doesn't mean that I also can't be really on it when it comes to business, that I can't be, you know, all over the numbers, all over data, like, you know, in terms of marketing strategy and, you know, sales and brand. I think in the past I maybe thought, well, if I'm spiritual like Natalie, then I can't be these other things. But it kind of, I guess, just linked into what you're saying there around, you know, you had your media blog, but you also had your spirituality blog as well. Those two elements of you can coexist. You can still be taken seriously in the media world and have this other side to you.
I'm about about to launch with a guy named Jerry Zaltman, who has written many best-selling books. He was a Harvard professor, and now he's still connected with Harvard Business School, but he's mostly just writing books now, and he's writing nonfiction books similar to Mind Magic. I mean, in the same genre of trying to help people be open their minds more and be more aware of their thought processes, like Mind Magic. But he has his own ways of doing it, and they're very complementary. So we're going to launch two different projects. One aimed at 5 minutes a day in public schools, and the other one aimed at 3-hour workshops for business leaders, for C-suites. And we're going to be combining practical ideas about improving, inspiring the workforce, helping to bring out the gifts of the individuals in the workforce, helping them to find their best talents, and giving them work that brings out their best talents, rather than frustrating their best talents by giving them work that doesn't inspire them. And how this affects media communications, how it could be a much more collaborative process where a brand can work with customers to create media of all kinds. So these ideas mix the idea of, I don't know if you, in this context, maybe it's not spiritual, but it's certainly moral, ethical, win-win situation for people, you know, humane, humanitarian, you know, pro-social, whatever words you want to use. We can take a more pro-social approach and still make money and grow brands. In fact, it'll grow brands better than anything else we've ever done.
Yeah, I mean, as you're talking there, the saying that's come to me is it's just not everything's black and white. It's not black and white. It's normally like an like kind of amalgamation of colors, actually. And I think, because when I reflect on my own beliefs and my own, you know, view of the world, it threads through everything. It's not just, oh, well, Natalie and this spiritual side of herself in a little cupboard. It's, you know, it threads through my entire being and how I am, you know, when I'm working on the business or when I'm working with other people or a team. It's very much interlinked, and it's not just black and white.
Yeah, it's not segregated, and it is holistic. And it's, I think it's our message is that there's a way we all win, and playing nice is, you know, a quick summary of it, but and having an open mind about the possibility, probability even, that we're all divine creatures and we're all part of one divine creature. We are, in fact, the only thing that exists is the one divine creature, and we're very active members of that. And it's a good thing. We wake up in the morning, jump out of bed full of enthusiasm for whatever's going to happen, because it's all such fun. That's why we're doing it in the first place.
Yeah. I always say life is like unwrapping a present. It's like, it's just one big long present. You don't necessarily know what's going to be inside, but each day you're unwrapping a little bit more. And it's exciting to see how much moves and changes in a day, because sometimes, you know, you can, and we've talked about this before, but sometimes, you know, not a lot outwardly may happen in a day, but internally, like, things are happening all the time. And I think those small changes, we're changing every single day. The environment around us is changing every single day. And if all you do in one day is go to the shops and come back, like, things are still moving forward. And I just think that that's incredible, because it's not until you look back you realize. So, you know, when I started this conversation, we talked about how I've needed every single experience to get here today talking to you, and it's not until you look back. So even if it you know, if there's somebody listening that is thinking, oh, I've not done much in the last year, like, these incremental, just tiny things will be part of this bigger story that you're writing.
Yeah, it's a beautiful perspective.
Yeah. Well, with that, I mean, I think that's us kind of at time. So it was a fantastic way to end. Very nicely tied the bow on our present. So yes, thank you everybody for listening to our first podcast episode, and we will be back shortly with our next one.
Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.